Joining us now to continue our discussion of the debt crisis is the Speaker of the House, John Boehner. And Mr. Speaker, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Chris, it's good to be here. Think about this remarkable conversation we're having. A year ago, we just passed a health care bill. We had a stimulus bill that was passed the year before. It was all about how much more spending Washington could do. And here we are in the 6 months after a new Republican majority, and all the discussion is about how many trillions of dollars we're going to cut. This really is a pretty remarkable change here in Washington, D.C.
All right. Having said that, you had a meeting, a conference call with the Republican leaders yesterday in which you said you want to be able to announce a plan, the framework of a plan today before the markets in Asia open. Are you going to announce that plan?
I'm going to continue to work with my congressional colleagues in both parties and my House Republican Conference to try to develop a framework within the cut, cap, and balance effort that the House passed this past week. I do believe that such a framework could come together, but it is not in place as we sit here.
Will you announce a Republican plan, or will you only announce a plan if you have buy-in from the Democratic leaders on Capitol Hill?
I think the preferable path would be a bipartisan plan that involves all of the leaders, but it's too early to decide whether that's possible.
Well, you just heard the reaction from Treasury Secretary Geithner. He was speaking for the White House. He was also speaking from congressional Democrats. He says this idea, which I know that you and the Senate Republicans are working on, of a two-stage process where there would be $1 trillion plus in cuts, debt limit increase till early next year, and then a commission to find more cuts, and also, if it's approved, raise the debt limit further, is unacceptable.
Well, there is going to be a two-stage process. It's not physically possible to do all of this in one step. Having said that, Chris, I know the president's worried about his next election. But my God, shouldn't we be worried about the country? We've got a budget deficit of $1.5 trillion. We're borrowing 42 cents on every dollar we spend. We have a $14.5 trillion national debt. It is time to get serious about stopping the spending here in Washington, D.C.
So are you suggesting that you might pass a short-term plan in the House and, in effect, dare the Senate, dare the White House to block it?
Chris, this is about what's doable at the 11th hour. And remember this, and you mentioned it to Secretary Geithner. The House has done its work. We've passed a budget. We passed a plan. We passed.
I know, but they've been defeated.
And balance.
They've been defeated.
And not one time in this whole process have Senate Democrats or the White House passed a budget, put a budget out there, or even put a plan out there. The conversations I was having with the president, in case the Senate didn't pass a cut, cap, and balance, there was never any plan from the White House. The whole plan came from us. We laid out the framework, and at some point, they've got to lay their cards on the table.
Well, you were the one in your conference call yesterday who brought up the idea of we've got to do something before the markets open in Asia this afternoon, Monday morning in Asia. How do you think the markets are going to react if the end result, the headlines at the end of the day and in tomorrow morning's newspapers are no deal?
The American people are asking the question, where are the jobs? And while Asia may be important, really, this is about American jobs in the American economy. And if we don't do something serious about controlling our debt, it's hanging over our entire economy like a wet blanket. That's why I believe that taking serious steps towards solving this problem will, in fact, breed more confidence in our economy and to help create jobs here. I'm going to do my best to work with my congressional colleagues, my House Republican colleagues, to be able to put a framework out there today to begin to remove this wet blanket.
But I just want to pursue this again. You talk about putting a framework out today. You're saying you would not do that unless you have Democratic buy-in.
I would prefer to have a bipartisan approach to solve this problem. If that's not possible, I and my Republican colleagues in the House are prepared to move on our own.
Today?
Today.
And that would be a Republican plan, and it's along the lines I've talked about, the two-step process. Cuts now, debt limit increase into early next year?
I don't want to get into all the details of what it may or may not be. If I have the details, Chris, and we're ready to announce it, I'd be happy to share it with you. We're not there yet.
The S&P ratings agency says that it will consider downgrading our debt even if the debt limit is increased if you end up with a short-term deal that indicates Washington isn't serious about dealing with this issue. Isn't that a concern that the markets could look at $1 trillion cut and a short-term deal that kicks the can down the road into early next year and you get another market meltdown?
I think it's important that we deal with our long-term problem. It's serious. Washington's spending's been out of control, and then what's happened over the last 2 years really shows how much out of control it got. $1 trillion stimulus plan, a health care plan that we can't afford, all of this extra spending that has not worked, and the spending binge has to stop. And our efforts all year have focused on trying to stop it. And as I look at trying to put together a plan with my colleagues, I'm going to work within the framework of cut, cap, and balance, because those are the three things that have to happen if we're going to instill confidence in our economy.
But when you say cut, cap, and balance, the Senate resoundingly tabled the idea of a balanced budget amendment. You're certainly not going to insist on that again, whether it's a good plan or not.
I continue to believe that a balanced budget amendment is the greatest enforcement mechanism to bring Washington spending under control.
But you're not going to make that a condition.
I'm going to continue to develop a framework within the principles of cut, cap, and balance.
I want to go over one part of the grand bargain you were negotiating with the president and the White House, and I went over this with Secretary Geithner. You said in your Friday news conference, you agreed to $800 billion in new revenue last weekend in a meeting with Secretary Geithner, and that the president moved the goalposts. You heard his response. Well, we didn't really have a deal. Did you have a deal with Secretary Geithner?
Last Sunday I thought there was an agreement of $800 billion in new revenue coming from a flatter, fairer tax system that would get our economy moving again, employ more Americans, and bring more revenue to the federal government. And I believe that we could get there. On Tuesday, the president said they needed more revenue. Mr. Cantor and I told the president, no. Wednesday, they said they needed more revenue. We said no. Thursday, need more revenue. We said no. On Friday afternoon, when the president called me and demanded $400 billion in more revenue, there's no way you can get that out of tax reform other than raising taxes on the American people. It was time for me to step back and to begin to figure out what's the path forward. Because it wasn't just the additional revenues the president wanted, their willingness to make fundamental entitlement reform, real cuts in spending, they continued to resist at every turn. And that's when I finally decided it was time to say no. It was time to reach out to my fellow congressional leaders and my House Republican colleagues and to develop a congressional plan to deal with this problem.
I want to pick up on one part of this because it's causing some heartburn for, frankly, House Republicans. What you're just saying is that despite your promise not to raise tax revenue, that you agreed to $800 billion more as part of this debt deal through tax reform, lowering all the rates, but also closing loopholes and ending deductions. You'd agreed to $800 billion.
Yes, because I thought we could get new revenues out of a growing economy that had more Americans working, more Americans paying taxes, and the fact that a fairer, flatter tax code means that we would have had a more efficient system of people understanding what their tax obligations were and our ability to collect what was due. Between the two, I believed that we could accomplish $800 billion without raising taxes.
But that was raising tax. It wasn't raising tax rates. It was raising taxes.
Oh, it was not raising taxes. If you look at how it was outlined, we agreed that taxes would have to be reduced from the current law, current policy, all the way down some $2.7, $2.8 trillion from what the current law is. Yes, it's about $800 billion over what the current policy is, but I thought that we could achieve that amount of money through fundamental tax reform, both on the corporate side and personal side.
There was a very interesting development today, and I want to pursue it with you. A couple of times, Treasury Secretary Geithner seemed to raise the possibility of the grand bargain again, and I know some administration officials are saying, well, would Boehner go back and accept the $800 billion?
I don't know. It may be pretty hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But my last offer is still out there. I've never taken my last offer off the table, and they've never agreed to my last offer.
So your last offer, $800 billion in new revenue and entitlement cuts, spending cuts, that's still on the table?
Still on the table. They know what my last offer was. But again, I think a better path forward at this moment would be to work with my bipartisan congressional leaders and my Republican colleagues in the House to put together a process that's doable.
There is considerable criticism among House Republicans, and I'm sure some of them are going to shake their heads watching what you've just said, that you're too eager for this grand bargain. You're too eager to make a deal with Barack Obama.
What I'm eager for is to do the right thing for the country. I didn't come here to be a congressman. I came here to do something on behalf of my country. I didn't want to be Speaker of the House because I needed a big fancy job. I wanted to be Speaker so that I could lead an effort to do the right things for our country. We've got a spending problem. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to tackle this problem in as big a way as I can because it's the right thing for the country.
Even if it causes heartburn in the House GOP caucus?
This is about doing the right thing for our country.
You now say that you and the president are from different planets. You have two entirely different views of the world. What made you ever think, what makes you seem to think even now, that you can make a deal with this president with his views on trillions of dollars in spending, entitlements, and taxes?
Well, Chris, I was born with a glass half full. I'm the optimist. And it's about trying to find common ground. Yes, I understand the president feels that we need a bigger government and more spending here in Washington. I believe allowing the American people to keep more of that money is the best way to create jobs and grow our economy. But having said the fact that it's almost like we come from two different planets. My job on behalf of the country is to find as much common ground as we can to help move the country ahead.
But Democrats are saying, and you heard this implied by Tim Geithner just before you, that you end up looking bad with voters because you walked out of the talks twice and you are willing to risk default because you want to cut Medicare and Medicaid to protect the tax cuts for the wealthy.
Well, I'm not going to get involved in all that political sniping. I'm interested in a solution to the problem that we face. I don't want to see default. I don't frankly want to get anywhere close to it. I think it would be
You are
bad.
close to it now,
We're
sir.
bad for our economy and bad for our country. And so I'm trying to find a common ground that's doable in the time that we have remaining.
Well, let me just ask you, and that's the last question, sir. How disappointed are you? Because according to your plan, as we understand it now, and it may change, $1 trillion in spending cuts in the short term. How disappointed are you that after months of talking, after this urgent deadline, that it seems now that maybe the most that Washington can come up with when you're going to spend $46 trillion over the next decade is $1 trillion in spending?
After over 6 months, conversations with the president about doing the big deal, about taking a big step in the right direction, it's pretty clear to me that they're just not willing to do it. That the next election matters more than doing what's right for the country. I'm not worried about the next election. I told the president months ago, forget about the next election. If we do the right thing for the country, we won't have to worry about who's going to get elected and who isn't.
Speaker Boehner, I want to thank you always, as always, for coming in, and we will see how the world turns this week, sir.
We sure will.